Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore our relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, A.C. Stauble
and Isaac Hill. Okay, welcome to a special episode of the Plant Cunning Podcast, where we have two amazing speakers with us, a scholar of magic and a practitioner as well. And we have Dr. Yvonne Chireau, who is a scholar at Swarthmore and has written Black Magic, a fantastic book about Hoodoo, Voodoo in America. We also have Mambo Elizabeth Ruth, who is the proprietor of Big Liz Conjure. We're very excited to have both of you here today. I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation, and yeah, I'm looking forward to see what we get into. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that we usually ask is, what brought you to the plant path, or what brought you to the magic path? And since both of you are also very involved in plants and working with herbs and gardening and so on, as well as magicians or a scholar of magician and a practicing magician, I'd like to know both, like how did you get onto these paths? How did you get to where you are now? And maybe we'll start with Yvonne. Is that all right?
Okay, all right. And thank you for having me. I don't get to see my beautiful Mambo that much. When we see each other, it's rarely in person, but online. There is a loving community of sisters and brothers and other people who are part of the Africana. I like to call it Africana spirituality. Groups and so forth, people who are initiates, practitioners, scholars, and so forth. So it's really beautiful to see you too. This is a question I don't want to go on too long about, because it's sort of a two-pronged question. As a scholar and a writer, I came into this one way, but I think I can safely generalize and say that for most African American people, or most people of African descent, their relationships with plants and nature begin with the family. I have noticed, and this is something actually I'm writing about, that mothers are the ones who, because in Black culture, the mothers were the ones who had to be the caregivers and feed the family. So a lot of our relationships with plants, that has somehow carried over after slavery, which was a very different scene. So for me personally, and I would say for a lot of us who are involved with either plants or nature, or even our cats and dogs, our pets, it has something to do with the mother and we like to talk about the divine feminine as if, and I do believe in that. But we rarely think about where Black women as sort of a spiritual anchor for the divine feminine fits in. So all that to say is, for me, my mother, she had a green thumb, and that was where I thought about it. But as far as my studies of this, I began to think about the connection between African American religion, magic, and nature, broadly understood, because a lot of what we think about conceives of magic in terms of supernature or the supernatural. So even my book, Black Magic, it's not about Black versus white magic. It's about race, Black as race, and how Black magic is seen as a terrible thing when it's associated with people of African descent. So I wrote that book, and that's really how I really began to focus on this in the 1980s, and trying to understand slavery, Africa, and its relationship to where we are today. So that's where I started from. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So, Mambo Liz, how did you get involved in all this?
I mean, my master's degree is in literature. My concentration was African American women writers from slavery to present, and for me, like we didn't think about things like in terms of magic, and witchcraft. These were things we just did. So my grandmother raised me. And then my mother afterwards, my mother was living in her apartment on disability and still had a booming little farm on her patio. So I, as I'm out, I remember I was gardening yesterday, and I'm very, very, very big gardener. I believe in growing a lot of things. Sustainability for myself, or to be able to, we've all seen examples through the COVID and the supply chain problems about the grid going down. I knew that I needed to know how to feed myself, but I grew up with people that had chickens in the backyard, that had acres of land that was farmed. My grandfather did that part. My grandmother did the flowers and things. And I remember gardening yesterday and thinking, man, my grandmother was older than me when we were out there in these gardens. And, I got bad knees, and she would get gigantic foam cushions from like the fabric store or whatever, and put elastic on them. And she was on that ground. But you have to understand, when I came to practice, like when I was in graduate school and undergraduate, and I was studying all this literature. So what you're looking at behind me, every single book on this side here is Black lit. Every single book on this side here is witchcraft and the occult and voodoo and the Bible and religion. You read things differently. Even being Black Student Union president, being civil rights advocate on the ground in my university days, but when I was reading from a Christian lens, you read these things differently, but sometimes they do hit differently. I think, and it was funny for me, for pivotal as far as my relationship with the church and understanding these concepts of God, actually came through reading Anne Rice's Memnoch the Devil. That really hit me hard and made me reevaluate and look back historically at all these other things and the lenses that I was reading from previously. So, when I was in my early 40s and the spirits started showing up again, I knew exactly who they were. I didn't know who they were by name, but I knew them because they were the same spirits that had lived and, coexisted and were venerated in ways that I didn't understand as a child when I was a child. And the way people talked about them and listening to family ghost stories and stuff and being able to put all those pieces together. What brought me to voodoo was the fact that my family was consistently visited by Baron Somdi anytime somebody died. He wouldn't be at the person who was dying in the house. He'd go to somebody else's house because he is the messenger, and he accompanies the dead as they move into their new iteration. So, once the spirits came back, and I had some mentors who actually owned a store called the Voodoo Store. It's now called the Brujo Brothers because they have a lot of things in their pantheon that they work with. They were like, "You don't know who that is?" And I was just like, "What?" And basically, told me, and then I, was able to put the pieces together. But I didn't grow up in a household where people went to church. So I grew up in a household where my grandmother, her Bible was Linda Goodman's Love Signs in the 70s. So we,
Nice.
everything that people associate, even down to taxidermy, I had coming up. Now I had a varied religious education, but there was nothing that we talked about as evil or dark. And these things often that come and incorporate into spell work, what people consider to be spell work, or the ways we treated illness, emotional or physical illnesses, So, I mean, I didn't see a doctor. I had ear infections when I was a little kid forever. I never got an antibiotic for an ear infection. I got sweet oil in my ear. So, and it's funny because a lot of people are like, this is part of our thing, and using of Vicks, camphor, vapor rub, and different things like that. Once you understand the doctrine of signatures, and once you understand these plants and how they work, you realize, oh, our medicine is also magic.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast too, is to because it seems lately there's been much of a divide between scientific herbalism and how healing has been practiced in all cultures throughout the world, where spirituality and healing and herbalism have all been combined.
Mm-hmm.
And it is true, the plants, they heal on a physical level with you can look at the exact chemicals in it, but it also heals on a spiritual level as well.
Yeah. Yeah, actually. Yeah. And I just want to comment on that because I talk a lot about nature now. I didn't talk about nature in the same way that when I was younger, but nature's become sort of a synecdoche for me for thinking about spirit, religion, magic. And it seems to me that the orientation or the emphasis on healing in African American and Africana traditions is paramount, and it often drops out of our conversations. And I have a theory about this, and Mambo can speak more to this. But where we get this idea of voodoo as this sort of sinister, evil thing that causes death and earthquakes and devils and just every kind of negative thing that's associated with voodoo. I think of voodoo as sort of a trope for talking about Black people and their spirituality. It can be traced to Haiti. All right. It predates it, of course, because those were the same things that Europeans said about Africans. Oh, witch doctors and witchcraft, and it's evil. But Haiti is really where we see this, the word voodoo becomes associated with all this scary stuff. And I bring that up because we always talk about horror and harming. What I talk about is harming in Haitian voodoo, right? But if you think about the origins of that religion in the island, this was the religion of the rebels. This was the religion of the revolutionary, the Black people, oh, not just Black people, the colored people, the African people who came together during that great period of revolution. It was, America had their revolution within 10 years. France had their revolution. It's all happening at the same time. So the religion of the rebels, all right, it was Voodoo. That's not scary, but that's come down to us as, no, it's not about healing. It's about killing and sacrifice and blood. And I make this point because if you go back to what we know about the religion of the rebels in Haiti, you find a strong healing tradition there. You find one of the saints, and I think Mambo can talk about this more, one of the great heroes, because there's lots of heroes that come from that period. Macandal, he was an herbalist. He was what they call an ogun, a priest, right? He was an herbalist. He was a veterinarian, but he was also, and this is key, y'all, a master of poison. So with healing, you always have this sort of harming when it comes to the leaf and the plant. And I think a lot of it can come down to how we, in this culture at least, feel about Haiti and what happened there. And so it drops out when we talk about voodoo. Voodoo's like, ah. And instead of the powerful healing that is associated with this, that certainly has to do with the leaf, but also other elements. So maybe you can add to that too, and sort of dispel these ideas about voodoo.
Right. So for me, because voodoo is a closed practice, and it's closed for a reason, because it's been shown that this is not for everybody. And those people who embrace this and don't have that full cultural context and understanding, they make a lot of mistakes. They make a lot of assumptions, because when I didn't think of anything bad about voodoo when I wasn't a voodoo sant, because I learned early on through my scholarship not to trust the European lens when it came to talking about the things that we did. In my space, there's people who come in my store and I've gotten some nasty little Google reviews as a result of it, talking about Black magic. And I tell people, don't think Black about my magic is me. And you got to understand that different cultural norms have different categorizations as far as what is evil.
Yeah.
I tell people we do what's necessary. What's necessary to keep ourselves alive, to defend ourselves from, hostile slavers and the like. Now, the thing is we all know that voodoo, and if you don't know, the Haitians were the only Black democracy. They were the only people that got rid of slavery and the slavers. I'm sorry, we got a cat here. They were the only people that got rid of that and set up their own democracy. And the craziest thing about it, the only successful slave rebellion, the most crazy thing about it is that, you know, they were cut off from the entire world financially, globally, as far as trade and things were concerned, and still would have been okay. But then we had the influx of the United States and other European things. I mean, they were literally charged by the French because they took their freedom back. They had to pay France billions of dollars. It's insane. So I learned very early on, especially when I was in college, that I could not trust traditional. I could not trust. He just fussed because I put him down. He's like, I couldn't trust what history books, even professors had to tell me. I mean, when I went to college in the late 80s, they tried to tell us that the people of Egypt were considered Caucasoid and everybody under the sub-Saharan Africa was considered Negroid. And I'm like, are you kidding? You looked at an Egyptian lately? A real Egyptian? So, I mean, I've been very much in tune with how people are miseducated. Voodoo. Do you know what the definition of that word is?
Please tell us.
See, voodoo means spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Period. We have to understand that when we were taken out of Africa, we were taken out of Africa as a continent, not a country. And there are numerous countries on West Africa's coast where people were taken with their own, animism started 100,000 years before the birth of Christ. So we're looking at literally millions of people who practice with spirit in many different ways. And so and that's one of the reasons why you'll see in voodoo, which is different than Orisha practices like Lukumi, it's also called Santeria or Ifa, that they have, those are gods. You're going to see more of a mix of spirits in Haitian voodoo from various areas. One of the things I definitely appreciate about the practice and all of the ATRs is that all of these spirits, all of these gods, most of them also existed in the flesh at one point or another, either chose to come down here and inhabit human bodies, just like the mythology of Jesus Christ. We've got our primordial spirits, and those are the spirits of everything that operates in the world. So when Dr. Yvonne talks about nature, these are nature-based religions.
Yeah. And I want to piggyback on that because that's so important. At least now in the United States, in 2024, we're beginning to talk about Indigenous American. They don't call it religion because there's no word for it in those hundreds of languages. But we're beginning to talk about Indigenous American spirituality more, right? We have yet to begin to think about Indigenous African. Again, they don't have a word for religion. They may have a word like Voodoo for spirit, but we have yet to get to that. Why is that important? Because people say, well, that's over there. Let's focus on here. Because I'm here, Mambo's here, because of millions of people who were brought from there. So the question becomes, what of Africa was retained and what was lost? Whether it's the deities, and many of the African deities, and again, as Mambo just said, it's, you have deities from various religions, whether they're Orisha religions or whether they're from, I'll say Congo, all right? Sometimes they're embodied, sometimes they're not. In all of these nature religions, there's a deity that owns or rules the leaf or the herb, all right? So that's why we're talking about Africa, because I hear that a lot now. You don't like it here? Go back to Africa. Well, yeah, well, I'm like, well, they did, freed Black people did go back to Africa, but that's not the point. We want to understand Indigenous spirituality. their relationship to plants, deities, magic, all of that, and how it reflects on the African American experience. And to me, that's where it gets kind of interesting. All right. So we'll have converts who, who practice a Haitian religion. We'll have converts or initiates, not converts, initiates who practice an African religion, but they're here. So I think the question for us, and maybe for you and your viewers, is, well, what does this have to do with American, magic, spirit, whatever, and that's the link. Because I think that's kind of lost sometimes. We're talking about Africans, you're not African. That's the question. So, I appreciate that. I really do.
Well, it comes from the American way of thinking. You got to understand that this country was founded on getting away from anything that reeked of Europe even. So they weren't even thinking about Africa. Let's just talk about colonization to begin with. They wanted to create this place, and then this was perpetuated even when Europeans came over here. Get rid of all that. Get rid of those traditions. For Africans, it was even more devastating because they were like absolutely forbidden, made voodoo illegal. Now you're going to tell me that they didn't believe in it? Yeah. That they didn't think it had any power? You don't make something that's powerless illegal. You don't worry about it. Yeah. And understanding, just like they understood with the indigenous people here in this country, that we had ways and means to survive without them, in spite of them. And that would crush any type of revolution. The psychological mind warping that it takes to enslave someone. And the fact that we didn't let go. The fact that to this day, we're talking about, you got to understand that for us, our spirituality has always been, I don't care if you was in the Holy Roller Church, practicing voodoo, I don't care what you were doing. It was always mind, body, spirit. There was no separation of that. And if you notice, even in the ways that we eat, everything in this country, macaroni and cheese, okay? The stop sign, the ironing board, Wi-Fi, air conditioning, we made it. We built it. We created it. And only because of the internet are mass quantities of people seeing that. So when you talk about what does this have to do with America, we built America quite literally. Slaves built the White House. We built America. It is very much a part of the fabric of America, even though America has had a very big history of erasure with all of its people, to the point where non-Black practitioners of magic always want to come and see what we got going, because they don't have what they had going. And in America, it was always assimilate, fit in. People changing their names, losing even their ancestral language, which we weren't even allowed to speak. But for the people who were, when they came here, there's the Welsh. How many people know Welsh? It's not even offered as a college language class. Mm-hmm. So the very things that would tie you to these ancient technologies have been erased due to American thought. And as always, it's so funny, I saw this I'm not even gonna say his name, some podcaster basically a Black podcaster had nerve to say that Taylor Swift moved the needle. And, in comparison, I guess, to who, I think he was talking about Beyonce. I'm like, think again. And then Cowboy Carter came out. You see the examples of brainwashing and institutionalized and socialized racism when you're going to say that a Black woman from Texas, Alabama, Louisiana can't sing country. When we created it. If you go and look at house music, I posted the other day, I'm from Chicago, I'm a house head. I grew up on house music. If you are, and I'm also a musician, you listen. And that's one of the things about magic that a lot of people don't get. And listen, they're not observant. You have to be very observant, especially to your surroundings when you are a witch, a practitioner, because you're dealing with nature, you're dealing with your environment, you're dealing with all these things around you. You could hear gospel, blues, everything in this woman's voice. And she was singing house hits. And she was one of the people who, 30, 40 years ago, was one of the main players with the music. We built it all. And people don't like to hear that, especially when it comes to magic. They don't want to hear closed practices because you've got a certain groups of people in this country that think they're entitled to everything. Ain't everything for everybody. But
Definitely.
and until you get to the point where you're acknowledging and living in, like I said, the people who was deep in the country, I mean, that means something, like Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson, people like that, they jumped on this album with her, because they understood, hell, even the Beatles understood it. So, so the people the thing is when people say they don't understand, they don't want to. I don't care what race you come from. I don't care who you are. There's so many Black people that, no, they're not ideal candidates for any ATR.
Sure,
because their mindset has not come out of, the mental, basically the mental mind fuck that we have been given. Even, root work, hoodoo, deep in the church even, because that's when we were still practicing our belief systems under the mask and under the guise of Christian religion. Anointing with oil. Water baptism does not come from Christianity. Let's think about this. Jesus was baptized. He wasn't a Christian.
Yeah.
All of these things that come from our, spiritual bathing, the use of crystals, they've even gone so far as to say that Black folks didn't use crystals. And I'm just, it really just comes from a lack of, it's cognitive dissonance, number one. You've known something to be this way all your life, and you can't see you beyond your nose.
Right.
And an unwillingness to just look at the research, just look at, and then you have some people who, don't want to consider research when making spiritual decisions. And I think that's a poor approach to anything. You got, in order to grapple with something in its present day state, you must know its history. You must know its origin point. You must know its purpose. You must know its key players and concepts and philosophies.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to study that. They'd rather just make assumptions.
Yeah. And I think looking into the history of how this happened in the first place, like there's the mindset of Protestantism, I think, is one of the big, because of a lot of the people who settled the United States, who started the United States, were religious zealots. Whereas like nothing exists except for God and the devil. That's it. There aren't any spirits. Magic is bad. Anything that you do that is like magic is bad.
That's a mistake. I'm going to argue different.
Okay.
Most of these founding fathers, they were either magicians, or they were agnostic, or they were atheists. So when you talk about who started this country and the reasons why they put those words in the Constitution the way they did was because of these other people. Okay, look at the movie The Witch. Yes, they were Puritans, they were religious zealots, but that was some stuff that they developed, make some of it in their own country, but most of it here. They didn't want to look crazy, but Protestants by and far, and then it has to do with the church separation of the Church of England from the Catholic Church, is because they do not acknowledge Catholics and all of their ceremony and all of their relics. They've got bones.
Magic, all of their magic. They don't acknowledge it.
They don't. Yeah, my father is a 70-some-year-old Seventh-day Adventist. And I told him, the Catholics were the first Christian church. And he wanted to argue with me. I was like, have you even read the Catholic Bible? It's got 6 more books than the Protestant Bible. They don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
So, it's because, and then, like I said, you have religious zealots that kind of went on the fringes, but make no mistake. This problem has always been about racism. Always. Beyond religion, racism, discrimination, oppression, slavery, annihilation, genocide that's happened throughout the Americas with the Native people that were here. And that's another thing. I love voodoo because voodoo is the religion of revolution. I love hoodoo because it is the practice and for some the religion. And I'm not going to argue with people about whether hoodoo is a religion. That's mine. I'm multi-faith and they work together. But no, it's really at the end of the day, anything you see ascribe to us as negative, bad, spooky, antichrist. And we won't even get into the the Ethiopian Coptic Christians. We won't even get into the fact that Christianity came out of Africa in the first place. Everybody did, but really, it's racism.
Wow, very, very. It's a very powerful statement. Yeah, and I agree with that. Although what we're seeing, of course, is how the idea of racism has become almost watered down. I prefer to go right to the source and say white supremacy.
Yes, okay, yes, thank you. Yes.
Racism, and I agree with you. Of course, it's racism, but when we begin to see how race was created,
right.
I'm not saying it was created by whites. Whiteness was created.
Yeah.
Blackness was created. So if we think of this in terms of hierarchy, okay, and these people, and I agree with everything that's been said. I say, yeah, racism is there, but this notion of white supremacy,
is
very imbalanced. It's very imbalanced. You think about it.
And we've been clapping back.
Yeah.
I would not have, tomes and books and things, but we the ones who know. We've always known the origin. We've always known the reason why we had to continue to do these things to protect ourselves. We come from people. My great grandmother was by a man who bought a plantation after slavery ended. And that's how my grandfather was born. And that was back in the day still when they was throwing black babies to the alligators. Every day I study the research and the history of my people, I find a new horror, but I also find a new salvation, if you will. I find new ways that we've managed to, and so I sit here, the result of over 4,000 ancestors, and I'm like, every day I'm amazed. I'm like, I made it here. How did I make it here? And so that has been my goal as a spiritualist, as a witch, as a hoodoo, as a voodoo practitioner. We made it. What were the things that we did to make it in the most inhospitable, horrific circumstances? How did I get here? So for me, I'm always about source. When I originally decided that I was going to be a voodoo scientist, and I went into voodoo and hoodoo as a Christian. But further research had me abandoned that part of my practice. Once you learn the history, once you learn where certain things came from, you learn about the Semitic text, you learn about all different things like that. And so it's for me, it's like Dr. Yvonne, it's an in-depth study of my background, my people, the places that we live and still live, what we've created. And for me, and I think it's essential to Black practitioners for our survival to be very much aware of all of this, because it does light a certain fire under your practice. It allows you to look at things through a non-myopic lens. There's no way I could just, based off what I was taught in school and by the church, be able to embrace such technologies, and that is what they are. I think one of the things that really bothers people who are very serious about this and have done considerable scholarship in these matters is that other people think that they can just jump on the voodoo train.
Voodoo train.
They have no concept of what it took to get here, not to mention that these are ancestral practices. So if you don't have any direct ancestral and cultural ties, because you do need to know what's up, there are things that you don't do in Black people's homes.
Yeah.
Okay. I grew up all my life. No, you don't sweep nobody's feet. Not knowing how it related to what they call the occult or hoodoo or witchcraft. I grew up throwing salt over my shoulder. I grew up ambidextrous because my great grandmother didn't like me working with my left hand. Mm. So, all of these things, you got to understand that we really have, and you're not going to get all of this stuff right away. And that's why when I teach my classes, I encourage scholarship. I give them a scholarly article to read called Nickels in the Nation Sack. And a woman who wrote it, I'm going to pull up her name.
Washington, Teresa Washington.
Yes, she Ann Petrie Scholar at the university, she wrote this. Somebody dropped that in my inbox one day, and it was like, whoa, this was probably a decade ago, and I started teaching it. Why? Because we have definite questions as African Americans. How does this really relate to Africa? Where does this come from? And this article steps you through pretty much everything, in a broader scope in our practices that we do and where it came from. And when that light comes on, it's so funny to me because people are really big on these ancestry tests and finding out where they come from. Europeans have always been about the family crest. Everybody wants to know where they come from and how they live their lives today. How does that tie to people ancestrally? And that's what makes this practice for me so beautiful. I'm also part Irish, but it would be really, really, really hard for me to go and find what my Irish people did because they wiped that out.
Yeah.
You have to dig real deep. And so sometimes I think that people think that our stuff is just easier and more accessible, and it's more recent. Yeah. That's the reason why it's better traceable, but it's not easily accessible to people outside of ancestry. And so for finding out who you are, and I think that there's a lot of non-Black people that are dealing with a certain level of guilt and shame, and also the acknowledgement that they still benefit from that. And so they don't want to work with their ancestors. And unfortunately, that's not my problem. I don't work with my enslavers either. They're not on my ancestral altar. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But at the same time, it doesn't give people the right to ask for the secrets.
Yeah.
Expect the inclusion
right.
that an ancestral practice takes. There are certain people who are called to this who are not Black. There was a certain amount of Irish and of Polish people that went over to Haiti and fought in the revolution because they hated the French. And those people live in Haiti to this day, speak Haitian Creole, are active in Voodoo societies. That's that cultural, ancestral integration that's really necessarily needed. And I got to tell you, we're looked at as outsiders, Americans. We're seen as Blanco. I don't care how dark we are when we go to Haiti, because we are.
Right.
And for me, the principles of Voodoo, the rich, I'm still learning. It's a lifelong journey of Voodoo. There are things that I don't relate to because of my Americanization. But I do relate to all things Hoodoo. And then the more things that you learn about that religion and you see how closely they're tied to Hoodoo, you make the connections and you get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we want to take a big view and look at be anti-myopic, look at what the big view, see how everything is playing into each other, how there's a lot of different cultural strains throughout the Americas, throughout the world, and we are living in also a very interesting time where that we have the internet. People are moving around a lot, and people are getting initiated in traditions from various places. People from America coming to Haiti and so on, and it's really interesting to also look at the difference between a religion, what is religion? What is initiatory traditions? Like, are initiatory traditions religion, or are they something else? Are they part of religion? And then magic. What is magic
That depends
compared
on who
to?
classifies it. I'm going to say this to you again. We don't
Yeah,
see those divisions.
right.
We understand that religion are man-made rules, processes, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Shaped around the cultural recognition of deities. So, no voodoo house is the same. In
Mhm.
South and North Haiti, completely different ways. There's an Asan lineage in the South, and there's the Cha-Cha lineage in the North, depending. And so for us, we have recognized these things. First of all, yeah, they're classified as religion, but that's classified as religion through a white supremacist look. We didn't have like initiations and this structure. The Asan lineage, I don't know. I think that comes out of when did they adopt the Asan lineage in Haiti? Dr. Yvonne, it was fairly recent.
It was more recent, long after the revolution, at least.
Exactly. Yeah, it's in the 70s, 80s, or whatever, out of 60s. I don't remember. But these ranks and things like that, that's not how that went. These are all rites of passage, no different than your bar mitzvah, okay? Your christening, and not everybody got initiated as a priest or a priestess in these days. This is kind of like a diploma mill these days with the initiations. And when you start to bring that very, very strange, warped American ideology into it, it's status, it's clout. Excuse me. And these people did not do things that way. In fact, in African culture, a lot of times the kings were also the priests. Okay. They were the high priest of the society. So it was all wrapped into one, and it wasn't all this, the money mill, pay me and I will make you powerful. That's no. Voodoo was a way of life. It was the way you function. You already knew how to do all these things because you watched your mama do it, your daddy do it, your people do it, And when you rose to a particular rank, just like indigenous Americans in Americas, when you rose to a certain point, you became a certain age, there were certain things that you've been observing your entire life, or things that were kept secret from you until you were old enough. And you took that next step in that rite of passage, and it was cultural. Religion is man-made. Spiritual practices are transcendent beyond all of that.
Yeah, this is really well said. I'm just agreeing with everything. I thought long and hard about this distinction between religion and magic, though, and even, cross-culturally. And I agree with Mambo that a lot of the distinction does turn on that notion of initiation, which is rites of passage. Of course, Christianity had that. That's how you make priests, right? Of course, Islam has that. All right. So I don't really, this is going to get me in trouble. Let me think about this. Well, I can say this. I can say this because I write in studies that I think that the distinction between magic and religion is more semantic.
Yep.
All right. When you look at these things historically, and then you see how the term has been used in different places and times. So I tend to throw that out. Not saying, though, that religion isn't as fascinating as magic. I just think that magic nowadays at least has a kind of prestige when we talk about it that religion doesn't,
Well,
and
I think that is because, internet again. We have history to look at. The Spanish Inquisition, the Crusades, enslavement, the slaughter of indigenous people in indigenous lands, and the wars that are fueled by religious fervor and persecution. And so, you would have to understand why that now religion in and of itself is looked at. It's such a way. And magic actually, for me, and the way it was, and it's also who introduces you to it. Because for me, I grew up in a household where we didn't have those assignments for the supernatural. We lived in harmony with the supernatural. We embraced it. We watched everything we could. We read everything we could about these different spiritual technologies. Nothing was considered evil or off limits, and so, I look at this as now we have more access to more historical things, and we can see how people have been persecuted for being witches or for, just different things. And it's like, it doesn't make any sense. So what you're looking at, especially, and I'm telling you, once again, like Dr. Yvonne said, we're going to take this all the way up to white supremacy. When we had all the Black Lives Matter situations going on and the pandemic happened and we got to see this stuff at Trump, it wasn't exacerbated. What we got to do is we got some people who had never had the opportunity to take a front row seat to any of these things, including spirituality, for the first time had the minute to breathe, because the American ideology is keep them working. Don't let them look. Don't let them look, because then they'll find the fallacies and all of these belief systems in capitalism and everything else. But these people had a minute to sit at home and be like, to have that spiritual awakening that I had many, many years ago. This ain't it. Let's go and see some people who have been studying this and find out what made them say, hey, this Abrahamic stuff, yeah, I'm good. And that's what we had happen during the pandemic. And I saw just this increase of people, leaving the church. Not to mention, the church doesn't make it hard for us. Everything from racist institutions to abusers of all different types, and they're the ones who are spouting that we're the ones doing these types of, disgusting, right, defiling acts. And I'm just going to put it real to you. The only church, the only institution that continues to replicate human sacrifice, it's the Christian church.
Yeah. Blood in the body.
Yes.
Yeah.
But let's take, and you were talking about how we see in movies and in language and society, voodoo. They always want to sell somebody dancing with a chicken. Folks ate those chickens.
Right.
Unless they were ones that were used for ceremony. No, some of that, and then part of that food goes to the spirit, offerings. And I made it my goal back when I was a Christian to read the entire Bible. Never made it through it, but I stopped at Numbers because it was like, woo, that's too much. But that's a great, kind of history, family tree. But burnt offerings, the details that the Bible goes into of burnt offerings, it's like they literally acted like we were doing something just like that had never, all the savages. Yeah. And you're reading about it in your Bible every week. But of course, they ignore the Old Testament. That's neither here nor there. It's like I said, if you're a thinking individual, you look at, even archaeological evidence, we ain't got none for Jesus. Every single piece of archaeological evidence that they said that they had belonged to Jesus was proven to be a fraud. But they pushing Ramses' body. He got a passport. He in France somewhere or Rome somewhere right now. Make it make sense when I can go and literally look on walls and see the evidence of what these people experienced and saw. And then I got the Paulinian books. This all I got to base my religion on. And I fully believe in salvation. I also believe in karmatic energy, karmatic debt. I believe in reincarnation. There's a lot of stuff I believe in, but I know that every single world religion teaches us how we live this life is how it's going to have a direct effect on our next.
Mhm.
Even Christianity.
Yeah.
How you're even adorned, how you are allowed to present yourself. So people thought I was going crazy when I decided to move to African traditional spiritual practices. And I said, no, this is the way you get closer to God. This is the way you get closer to the source, by studying the ancients. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for non-African, non-Abrahamic traditional religions. And that's what I encourage people, like, find them all out. Okay. But like I said, you've not seen the attacks on Celtic paganism, Galima, not even Wicca, that you have seen on anything that comes out of Africa, which is mind-blowing to me, considering archaeological evidence tells us that's the source of everything, including religion.
Yeah. And we do see in general that, so it's not just that black magic is magic, it's that it's black magic. It's African magic.
It's black.
Because that magic itself is derided in at least in Protestant Western culture. I mean, like, when you say ceremonial magic, which is something that I practice, it immediately evokes these 70s horror themes.
But it also evokes Crowley. They don't
Yeah.
go back far enough, because if you start studying ceremonial magic, which I am,
Yeah,
you're working with the Keys of Solomon. So, but the funny part is, Black folks been doing this.
yeah,
The 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th books of Moses,
yeah,
the Solomon's, the red dragon room, we've been doing this.
yeah.
So, and it's just so funny to me that, that like I said, you do not see these forms of magic being villainized. And first of all, I think if more people knew the sources of ceremonial magic, they throw it into the same, luckily I have a mentor who is versed in so many of these practices, even in demonology. When you really, really look back, so, you will see a Kabbalic origin point. And when we start studying Kabbalah and ancient Judaism practices, is just like when we study ancient Christian practices in Ethiopia. Oh, everything looks like witchcraft.
Yeah.
It was all taken away by this Protestant church that wanted to remove your power as a practitioner with a connection to God and nature.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Look further away from God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It kind of begs the question for me, and even though we're not talking about plants, these are things I think about because I taught a class on magic and religion theory and practice this semester. What you just said, I think both of you are suggesting that, okay, we have ceremonial magic, we have folk magic, we have magics in America, and magic is the religion of the other. Okay, it's become a slur.
Right.
But at the same time, Mambo, you just said, well, we have Kabbalah, we have, and you do this. Hearing people, I hear things. And one of the thoughts I hear is, well, if Black people can do Kabbalah, if Black people can do all ceremonial magic, why can't we do African American Hoodoo?
The thing is
why can't we? Why is it a closed system? So, and this is a really controversial thing, as you know, but I think it's a legitimate question. So why can't we? Why can't we?
Because this is a very interesting thing, and trust me, for years I avoided ceremonial magic. I avoided anything that spoke to European magic because I'm a very much personally, I didn't tell people what else to do. But then I started seeing African Americans in this country have a very unique cosmology. I'm 24% European. And if those are ancestral practices, guess what? I got ancestors there.
Mhm,
I can do that.
mhm.
Unfortunately, the way this country was designed and white supremacy was that there are a lot of people who never ever engaged in that ancestral mix. They never had a part of it. See, I've always had knowledge of my German roots, of my Irish roots, of my Scottish roots, and education therefore. So I've already got the ancestral practice, but let's stop and look at Jesus wasn't white. And his predecessors in Judaic magic, especially Kabbalic magic, they weren't white either. They existed before whiteness ever began.
Right. There weren't white people as
Exactly.
that
So
time.
that's why I can do it.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, now let's stop. I'm answering your question. Why can't we do that with black people? Because those things in this instance, they did not exist. Okay. The way we have them here, Haitian voodoo. Yeah, the way we practice Ifa, the Kumi Santeria here. Whiteness predated those traditions.
Mhm.
And because of our exclusion in things like ceremony magic, we couldn't even become Masons. That's why we had to go and become part of the Scottish Rite. We could not become Masons because these things were developed and honored and fostered as a result of white supremacy and had to be kept hidden in order to survive. And out of respect, you got to understand the same reasons why we have to have closed practices in our traditions still exist today. So, you know, when I first got in magic, I was like, we are the world, we are the children. Everybody, my first voodoo house, the Mambo was not Black, was not even Haitian. And, you know, then I got in it and I started seeing how people who were outside of the culture, even me being outside of the culture, I could tell how they behaved in these traditions, saying things like Azili Freda is a thought. If you don't know what a thought is, it stands for that hoe over there. No, Azila Freda has two husbands.
I thought.
Yes, this is a little white and gone talking about this shit. We see once again through it, you know, it's not, it's, I mean, people need to understand that we're programmed. Even Black people are programmed with the really bad things about white supremacy when it comes to everything. When I came into paganism, I expected to be around all these we are the world loving hippies. I did not know that there were subsets of pagans out here that were incredibly racist and incredibly sexist, you know, as the misogynoir. Oh my God. Listen, you don't, but it's everywhere. And, you know, the anti-Blackness is everywhere. And if you've never seen the documentary called Ethnic Notions, you know, when you think about how did we get here, it's a good study in how the media, and I'm talking about before we had televisions, shaped these ideas about people of indigenous and African cultures as ignorant, you know, big-lipped, bug-eyed, stupid, that we then later saw in movies with characters like Stephen Fetchit, and Amos and Andy, and different things like that. I mean, a literal programming from the very newspaper advertisements. They're still making Sambo toothpaste that's sold in Japan. Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, you know, in this day and age, we just had a situation a couple of years ago where, you know, people boycotted H&M. They tore up the H&M in South Africa for making an ad of a Black child with a monkey shirt on. You know, it's like what people, and I see this with religion, but how this, I mean, because it's all, like I said, mind, body, spirit, it's all one. So you're going to see these things in every aspect of your life, and you are definitely going to see, and then they'll be like, well, we didn't know. How could you not? Do you have any Black people on staff? You know, so yeah. And then we see things like, I've seen white priests and priestesses do voodoo drumming ceremonies at New York Fashion Week and stuff like that. It's like, are you
Right.
things you wouldn't do with Jesus? I'm sorry. If you wanted to retain, any semblance of a customer base, this real disrespect, making Papa Legba look like a very, I don't know any gay spirits, not even Baron Criminal looks like that thing they put up in American Horror Story. And so that leads today to some white woman walking up to me with her book of Loire stickers that she's selling, and every single image is an abomination and an insult.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm at the point where I understand that maybe this, like I said, everybody doesn't need this knowledge, because they'll either misappropriate it, pervert it, commercialize it. And it's like, it takes all of the beauty. Just like if you see a prosperity preacher, you look at Joel Osteen locking people out of a church and flying around his private jet, and his wife having meltdowns because she can't hang up her clothes on an airplane. And it's just as insulting. It's just as bad for the practice, But
Yeah.
like I said, with Black people in this country, we're just in a very weird juxtaposition where we have a very mix of ancestors that most people don't. And so, while it may be difficult for them to connect to those practices, and those practices also aren't closed, because one or two things happen. Even it got wiped out by the church, or they remained open, but couldn't nobody get to them.
Yeah.
But even though, if you look at that, like the royalty in England, they initiate into a magical order. Okay, that is Welsh. All right. So they still even have access to the old secrets.
Some of them, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to talk about what is a closed practice, because there's closed practice based on culture, and so, like, some people say that like hoodoo is a closed practice, but then there are closed practice in terms of initiations, and initiations, as you were saying, in terms of like that used to be just
They exist everywhere.
right, exactly. And
You
then there
can't
are
just walk
also
up and become a Catholic priest.
right, but then there are those initiations that are, so for instance, a tantric initiations into like very specific mantra sadhanas with specific deities,
Don't
and
nobody give Hindus smoke like this, but Hindu's religion has always been.
right. So
I
the
don't
religion is
know.
open, but there are specific lineages which you have to be initiated into in order to practice that
In different
specific.
ways, right?
Yeah.
You have to, sometimes to be a basic worshiper, say for example of Hinduism, you don't have to go through any, and you don't have to do that for voodoo or hoodoo. You don't have to go through initiations to be a worshiper. You have to go through initiations to be a trained priest.
Right.
But what I'm telling you, and we just gonna roll back to what we were talking about before, the reasons why they were closed practices is ancestral.
Yeah.
And because they made it, there's plenty of white people in history who were integrated into the Black community and who were workers and things like that. And they were part of these traditions. You got a few of them today, but it's not the same as what we're seeing out here with people trying to make stickers.
Yeah.
And
capitalizing and commercializing and misappropriating in that way. Right.
Yeah. And I'm like this. Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Right.
Let me tell you something. I'm bisexual. I left the church because the church that I thought I was going to, pro-Black and progressive, was incredibly homophobic. Okay. I don't understand it. I don't even understand the fascination. I don't want to be any place I don't belong.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I don't. And so closed traditions were closed because it used to, like I said, there's levels to this here. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's definitely just like how people used to identify by parish.
Yeah.
it's where you from. It's
Where you're
all
from.
of those, and it had to be protected because there are also secrets
Yeah.
and
Right.
secrets to accessing the spirits. And those same spirits, for example, powered the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah.
Why am I gonna give white supremacy the keys to the castle?
Yeah.
The very reason why I'm having to do this work, fight to survive. Why am I gonna give that away? Why am I gonna write books about it even?
Right. Because hoodoo evolved as a response during slavery to be able to survive. So it's developing after whiteness.
No. Jesus
No?
Christ. No. Hoodoo is us. It's what we were.
Mm.
It just so happened that we came equipped with a unique set of survival tools. It didn't develop, it was when we got here. It wasn't something that all of a sudden sprung up just because we were on American soil. However, what it became was a conglomeration of all these different countries and villages and states doing it because they used to separate us if we spoke the same language, worship the same gods. So we had to, when we came here, we had to adapt.
Yeah.
You know, and use certain things. So then the creation of certain things, because I try to tell my students all the time, do you think we was lighting 7-day candles in slavery? I mean, that's something that didn't happen until the advent of the spiritualist church down in New Orleans. Now, did that not say that we didn't work with the element of fire? No, because we most certainly did. You know, when you think about cauldrons and things like that, we was cooking in them. We were using those lamps to light our houses as well as to use that light to attract spirit to protect us. So it evolved, it adapted, but we all came with it.
Yeah. But there is like this historical idea of hoodoo where like the name hoodoo, using psalms, for instance, using the plants from North America, that, you know, all these kind of things that what it evolved into.
Yeah. But like I said, it evolved. It wasn't created here. And hoodoo, depending on who you ask, was just a variation of voodoo. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, this is such a broad thing that it's hard to generalize because of course Africans were brought to all parts of this country over hundreds of years. So when we say this thing was, well, when was did it happen when they came to New England, these enslaved people in the 17th century? Did it happen in the 19th century when most of these people came to the South? So it's hard, but I'm fascinated by this sort of use of hoodoo to sort of frame the sensibility of these enslaved African people. I hadn't thought about it this way, but you made me think about a source, because as a historian, I mean, I love to talk about myths and stories, but we're always looking for documentation, which is really tricky in religion because a lot of these things, they weren't written down, they were imagined or visualized. And one of my favorite sources that I found that I mentioned in my book, Black Magic, describes what I think it's one of the earliest documents about what we would call a hoodoo man. It's one of those ads, those advertisements that they posted when these Black people ran away, because that was rampant, right? So when you couldn't fight for your freedom, you would take off. So lots of advertisements come from those colonial newspapers, right? And they describe these people who ran away. This one I found, he's described it, he practices cunning. He's an African. He doesn't speak, and you had to be really detailed because you're putting these ads up because you want to get these people back. It's like when people advertise for their pets. He had a scar, but this one, it said they call him Dr. Hercules. And so this is early 1700s. They call him Dr. Hercules. He practices cunning. So they're using the language of English people, right?
Right.
They say, he says he has practiced miracles, pulling things out of, and it's clear that there's a skepticism, but it says he did this for the larger community, not just for the Black folk, the enslaved people. So And the tragic thing is, of course, he leaves his wife and his child behind. That's all we will ever know about this man, how he lived, how he died, what happened to him. But to me, it was golden because, first of all, it's documenting, wow, there were healers. They used, and it even describes some of the things that he did. They called them cunning doctors, as they did white practitioners, witches and so forth. He's African. And so it's sort of a composite image. But that was in Georgia. It wasn't, it was in Savannah. Okay, because Georgia was very, very late coming in. So that was in Georgia. I find another document in New England. So, and of course in New England, again, witches, cunning people everywhere. So what I'm saying is, are we going to call them hoodoo? Are we going to call them hoodoo? I wouldn't presume to do that as from the present day. And I think this is what Mambo is saying. We can claim that. It's almost like they did with Wicca, right? We're going to take this and say it what it is. But trying to figure out what it was, that to me is
that's an impossible thing. Because this is the bottom line. I'm gonna tell you right now, hoodoo, I ain't know nothing about no hoodoo prior to about a decade ago. What I knew was root work, throwing a root, root work, cunning, hexing, cursing, blessing, anointing. Hoodoo, I don't even, people that I haven't found anybody that can say this is where that term came from. Once again, academic, conglomeration of terms. They just got to name something. Yeah. And it's so funny for me because hoodoo's me. You got to name something that I just been all my life, but that's the thing that we're moving. And I don't have a problem with the term per se. In fact, I used to just call it root work. And then I decided to reclaim the term hoodoo because I noticed a lot of people outside of the ancestral lineage were getting traction and commercializing the term. So I'm like, let me give somebody a term that they'll hit on and they'll understand so they can come and find out what this is about. But we did not call it hoodoo. We called it root work. It said throwing a root on somebody. So that's a very recent term. And like I said, people just anthropologically, classify things, and language changes. Think of all the language that we didn't have that we have now. ADHD. When I was a kid, they just called you hyper.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. ODD. They just called you bad.
Yeah.
The use of they, though, cracks me up because we've been using they for a pronoun when we didn't know whether someone is a man or a woman since the beginning of time.
Sure.
It's been always a part of English language and grammar. Language matters, but I just, like I said, the only reason why I even use the term hoodoo to describe what I do is from an academic sense and because I am a merchant and an educator, a commercial sense. So if people really want to know what this is, where this is, because I tell my students all the time, we know nothing about no hoodoo. We knew voodoo though. We heard the term voodoo. We knew what voodoo meant. And because of the way we were educated in this country, it wasn't ever good. So yeah, I learned a long time ago to stop looking at people's labels because we've been so fucking mislabeled for so long in all manners.
Right.
And then you come and you look and you do the research and, and I see this with any oppressed group. I see this with women. I see this with indigenous people. You find all these things that they did, but when I was a kid, all we talked about was George Washington cutting down a cherry tree, a story that never even took place in the first damn place. We were educated. I read lies my teacher told me, and I found out Helen Keller, I loved her, was a communist. We even have people rewriting history, but even Laura Ingalls Wilder was like, yeah, they changed some language in her books because she grew up when that was the way you talked about indigenous people here. And then they took away the very award that bear her name. They took her name off of it. Language evolves.
Yeah.
And that's why I learned not to be defined by it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's an interesting juxtaposition and dance between their scholarship that we need words to define things. We need, for if you're a merchant, if you're have a business, you need to be able to market yourself.
Yeah.
And then we have the real life examples of people who have different skills and abilities and gifts and work, like, in Appalachia, there's people who are better at like wart doctors or water witches, like but there's all these different abilities, skills, and gifts that people have that everyone's very individual, and it's hard to say, like, using any one word for that one person is
right. And we are not a monolith.
Yeah.
Even at our smallest, at our sociological classifications, we are not a monolith. Hoodoo in this country could vary by family, could vary by region, could even vary by growing zone, what you have available to you.
Right.
So you can use one form of a plant for devil shoestring in one location and another one. And then, what bothers me the most about this, and, people do not learn their doctrine of signatures when it comes to plants and herbalism, because that's, where it comes from. They don't understand that you can use cramp bark for devil shoestring, whereas other people, I can't remember pronounce it, Tiphonius virginius or something like that, because somebody else made that popular as devil shoestring. Well, it just depends on where you lived, who raised you, and who taught you.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned the regionality of it. We were just talking before you came on about the zones and how, the gardening zones have even changed. I find that root working is very regional, and I'm actually looking more at this in that people who, and again, Mambo's right, it can even vary within families, but we find that, again, as enslaved people settled and then moved, they would sometimes get to know the spirits of the land and of the earth. And like all indigenous religions, again, you're working with the land itself, which is a spirit, right? And you're working with the plants in that region. So I find that it's making me think. For some reason, I have this image in my mind, and I always think of the Middle Passage as, that's the place where this sort of transition. The Middle Passage has become probably the most important symbol for us as African American people in transferring, spirituality, magic from Africa to America. But there's this story, and I don't know the source of it, maybe you've heard it too, Mambo Ruth, of how some of these enslaved people would braid the seeds into, and even talking about it, I can feel myself getting emotional. They had no idea whether they would land in a place that's tropical. What was the seed? What was the dream that they had, that and these people were naked. They had nothing to bring with them. Some of them brought the seeds. Some of them brought smuggled plants, and some of them swallowed some of these stones and seeds so that they could pass them through their bowels. What was the value of that? They had no idea whether they were going to zone 6 or so. They had no idea. But there was something about that they had to keep from there to here. And to me, that is the story of Black America. What was kept, what was taken and lost, and what was maintained because it was so sacred. And so I think of that story, and I'm sure you've heard it, that they're putting, because on a slave ship, what can you have? They're hiding the very seed in their hair. I don't know what seeds those were. I don't know what tradition, because a lot of this is based on tradition and it's come down. I don't know what it was.
Some of them was black-eyed peas. There's even a story in Voodoo about one of the Loa who had crystals all entwined in their locks, in their dreadlocks. And I don't call them dreadlocks, but locks. And, to be able, but there are also stories. And that's why I understand why some people, especially Black people here today, are so separated. There are stories, and one was it was told in High on the Hog, where before you got on that boat, the enslavers, the white enslavers and the African people who were selling you, because we did sell, with slavery in the United States was way different than slavery in Africa, number one. Number two, often these people came from different countries and they were prisoners of war and things like that. They were not, they weren't selling their kids. And
Right.
just like, like there's been war since the beginning of time. There has been slavery. Americans, they took that shit up a notch. Like I tell people, when you hear the word medieval, you don't think about anything African. When you think about the medieval torture devices and how they took that shit up a notch, but when you think about a witch doctor, of course, you think about a Black person. When you're just talking about the levels of insanity here and violence, and they talked about how, and of course, because religion always involves magic. I don't care what religion it is that you have. There were ceremonies. There was water they made them drink. There were things they did to separate them from Africa before they got on that boat. Because the Africans, they was like, we don't want them in this backsplash. We don't want you to be in them. You gone. You can't come back. We want you actually to forget who you were. There were actually spells cast on Africans, but some of them, well, most of them, a lot of them, we were more mentally strong than that. But there were a great deal of people where they attempted to cast spells on us to reduce our desire to escape, to reduce our desire to go back, to reduce our desire to even know who we were. And I think that the people who put those seeds in their hair were made impervious to that type of working because of the people who swallow those crystals were made impervious because of that energy. If the principles of magic and energy that we follow today were the same then as they are now, they blocked that shit. Some of us, they got through. Some people drank the Kool-Aid and generationally continue to do so because of spell work.
That's really interesting, seeing those seeds and crystals as protective talismans that allowed you to retain your identity. That's amazing.
That's what we always did. Every seed. Yeah. The doctrine of signatures. Not only is it connected to an energy, a planet, and an element, it's connected often to deities. Before there was the tree of life, there was a seed that grew that tree.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to really think about how you got here. You cannot look at end point or recent point without studying its origins, which is the one reason why I practice anyway, which is the reason why I'm not a Christian today, because I'm not looking at just what we do now. I'm looking at how did it get to be that way? How did Culpeper come up with planetary alignments? How did folks not kill themselves and understand how to use these different herbs and roots to do a particular malady? And yes, some of them did kill themselves. Just like people have adverse reactions to Western medicine. That's why I try to tell people, stop and think about the origin point. When you are swearing off Western medicine because you all crunchy and shit now, where do they get the medicine? Sorry.
Right. And Culpeper studied with his grandmother. His grandmother was an herbalist. His grandfather was an astrologer. So he grew up, with that in as part of
But the question is, how did he come to make those assignments? That goes back to looking at the energy of the assignments.
Yeah.
Looking at things elementally, looking at things planetarily.
Yeah.
All these things that are part of witchcraft. Okay. Because if you go and you look at modern religion, mostly Christian, I'm just going to say it, they're not looking at these things. They're not looking at alignments. They're not looking at, even with the food you eat, the things that, and I don't know, maybe it's because, like I said, once again, it's the American mindset. modern pharmaceuticals has kind of made that easy on you because they went and found out what that stuff was, and then they compounded it into a pill that you would take to treat, not heal, to treat a problem that you could have used herbs and roots to prevent that problem in the first place.
Yeah. Right.
So that's the thing, we have to understand origin points. And that answers a whole lot of questions. If you go back as far as you would, nobody would ever ask the question, why is Haitian voodoo closed? If you just went back and studied and looked at some unbiased research, you'd understand. You'd understand. Just like different things in Hermeticism, ceremonial magician. Like I said, not everybody should or has the talent to access some of these practices for different reasons. Why is Haitian voodoo any different? Because it's Black. Why is our magic associated with bad things? Because it's Black. We have the ability.
But okay, this is where I can draw everyone in, because I'm thinking right now of ethics. All right. And this is where my students, because they're young and they're all about revolution, and they're saying, why can't we kill our enemies? Why can't we use belief in the arts of poison that were well known, even in the religions, these African religions? Why can't we do that as part of our contemporary magic? I don't have any, they're asking me as if I have an answer, but it speaks to this issue of the ethics of healing, which is what I want to talk about, versus harming, which is what everyone wants to talk about. And so this is worth thinking about, because I actually don't know the ethics of ceremonial magic. I know that there's a strong, or any of the non, I'll just say non-Africana magics. I know that there's a strain of defense, self-defense, in all of these traditions, but cursing, things like that have always been a part of magics. Is there, because we're civilized, most of us, an ethics of, and particularly with the leaf, right? The leaf is used for healing. The leaf is used for poison, all right? But is there an ethics here? Is there a universal ethics even of magic?
No.
I like to say for Black folk, because we were enslaved and ethics were flipped on their heads, because, we can't steal ourselves. Yeah, you can. So because we're property. But even that seems to be a cop out a little bit. Right. Is there an ethics of yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In my discussion of this, the reason why things are closed is not from a perspective of, we don't want you to know how we will harm you. Okay. Mine has always been, we will not let you know how we managed to stay alive. So I'm looking at this from that healing perspective, from that spiritual perspective, from that growth perspective. In Voodoo, there is a saying, good begets evil. Good begets good and evil begets evil. But let's talk about that. When we start talking about ethics, you even have justified homicide in mundane life. So when is killing wrong or right? It's too subjective. It depends on the situation. And that's one of the things that really pisses off my students. They come to me with a scenario of magic, and they'll be like, well, what? I said, it depends. It depends on what you're practicing. It depends on what your spirits are like, because we teach our students, check with your people, check with your ancestors. Before I go out and do anything that could be considered benevolent magic, I check with my spirits. My spirits let me know if I need to do anything at all, which spirit to work with, and asking the right questions instead of can I, should I, and like I said, that really backs up to the bigger belief of karmic debt.
Yeah.
How much shit are you going to throw? And are you going to be able to evolve, because this whole thing, and I don't care what religion you are, even if you're agnostic, okay, I'll take this all the way out. I'm going to include atheists in this. We're trying to get better to our next life, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to operate in higher energy, right? So I have to work from the highest energy.
Yeah.
When I'm working, but that does not mean that I'm going to take somebody else's shit.
Mhm.
If somebody else's shit is blocking my highest energy, you got to be usually banished out of my space. And there are some truly evil people of all different races. And I don't know, maybe they're mentally ill. I don't know. But there are that we have to defend ourselves against. Individuals, organizations, governments, we have to insulate and protect ourselves against. It's very much apparent. This is not something anybody just sat up and made up. Right. So we do have to be able to protect. We do have to be able, if necessary, to end a life that is coming for ours. And so one of the things, and it really is a big problem when you talk about Wicca, because I have people come into my store, and this woman wrote this really long, horrible Google review, simply because I told her, I said, she's mentioned some people who are victimizing her, right? I said, well, we do have reversal things. I don't consider reversal to be benevolent magic.
Right. Yeah.
Send that shit right back. She was like, right. Oh, I don't do that. And I said, well, that's a very Wiccan perspective. And unfortunately, I don't practice Wicca. That's all I said. To the point where people don't want to protect their neck. And we all can see what the disadvantages of not protecting yourself. What the Europeans brought into Africa and to be able to do some of the stuff that they were doing was gunpowder. Was that technology.
Yeah.
They brought that in there, and that's what they brought to the Americas. And the natives did not have that technology. Right. And that, just like we created the atom bomb. This country has created the most lethal things to humanity. And we really do. And, I don't know how you protect yourself against the atom bomb other than very high spiritual influence. That's one of the only things I'm scared of is damn atom bomb. Mm-hmm. But where we got out of this thing where we need to protect ourselves, and we need, and because there are, unfortunately, it's yin, it's yang, it's duplicity, duality, it's balance. And I tell people this all the time. If evil did not exist, how would we know what good is?
Yeah. And I like what you said about the karmic debt and karmic and balance as well, because for me that's what it's all about. It's like I'm not going to do anything to somebody that behind closed doors that I wouldn't do to their face, And
oh yeah, see, I'd rather whoop somebody's ass than throw magic at them. I mean, because if I get mad enough to throw at you, I want to beat your ass. I want you to feel it and remember it from me, from these hands. Mm-hmm. But you go to jail for shit like that.
Right.
So, I luckily live in a day and age where I can't go to jail for throwing a curse at somebody. Like I have a neighbor. She takes care of 3 cousins of hers. She's an older lady. These are young kids. The cousin that obviously the mother had mental health issues and substance issues. But the way this woman has talks to these children, I have said something to her numerous times because I don't want to hear it. Yeah. It's also very triggering to an emotionally abusive childhood. Hey, I don't think it's right, but keep that in your house. You should not have a therapy session with the social worker on your front porch where I can hear you cursing out these children with my window open. Told my mentor about it. They came here for a religious ceremony and he said a few words in my front yard. Those kids moved out the next week.
Wow.
Wow.
And and they were over here yesterday, one of the little girls I pay to help me in the yard and stuff. Sweetest kids in the world. And I'm just like, nobody deserves that. So, what did my mentor do? He made sure that it stopped happening. Now, people can say, oh, that's a coincidence. Whatever. It's cool.
Yeah.
I know what happened. I know I've been dealing with this for the past couple of years. And it wasn't until he went and dropped a few words on his way out the door that all of a sudden, these kids, all of a sudden, their mama healed. They're going back home. In a private Catholic school in Bexley, which is a very expensive area of Columbus here. Won't they do it? That's what I say. Won't they do it? When I say they, I'm talking about my ancestors. I'm talking about my spirits. I'm talking about my God. Won't they do it? So I'm put here. If I got to live in this earth, I got to live in truth. And truth is going to be different on an adjustable scale for everybody according to their own experiences. But I'm a scientist, and I believe in energy at the very least of it all. And I am a big into anthropology, so I understand society's frameworks for those things. So, and I understand humanity and how we operate. And I understand that some of these folks we walking around here with, they may not be human. Think about that. Thousands of years from now, they might do the same examination of our remains that we did on all of the humanoids and things that came through evolution, right? Okay. I apologize. Hold on a second.
Yeah, our little boy needs to pee here soon, so.
Yes, you have to take him out.
Well,
that's why I'm not a dog person, because I'm not trying to get up and do nothing for nobody to go to the bathroom. Other than that, I love them. They're just so
Yeah. Nice to visit.
Well, we've gone for almost 2 hours already, which is great, and I really appreciate this discussion. We've gone in a lot of directions. And are there any final words that either of you would like to say, and also how can folks find out about your work?
Well, I want to first thank Dr. Yvonne for laying this at the feet of white supremacy. Because if we look at every single world religion that didn't involve that, their Christian core Abrahamic relief, but you can find that in every single one, that persecution in every single one of them. So I want to thank you for that, Dr. Yvonne. I appreciate that greatly, because it goes beyond racism.
Yeah, it goes beyond racism. Yeah, I would just say, I don't have any profound words, but even saying that, you'll get a thought and a pushback that says, well, it's not, and I don't have anything to do with slavery, and I'm not racist, blah 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 blah. that is so beside the point.
Right.
When we talk about white supremacy, we're talking about an idea. We're talking about whiteness as an idea, just like blackness is an idea. It's not that, it has nothing in some ways to do with white people or what we call white people. It's this idea.
It's the structure.
It's almost like a philosophical idea, but I don't even want to.
It's a school of thought. Upon which this country was based on. So therefore, all of the fallout of everything that is not what they deem to be white is evil, bad, and mentally incompetent. Because a lot of times they would think that we were crazy or not educated enough. And that's why we did these things without looking at what it really does. But pharmaceutical companies would not have studied the zombieing powders of Hades, or at least tried to. You've seen A Serpent in the Rainbow. They tried to study these technologies because they were that.
Yeah.
Folks been doing surgery since Egypt.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
They wanted to improve using these technologies of what people have called primitive. Because, you can't make no money off primitive. That's why you have the FDA and why holistic things are not approved. You can't make money. You can't bastardize what's of spirit. Okay, unless the spirits are bastard themselves, and we got enough of those too.
Yeah. For my final word though, I would just say I'm tremendously optimistic. I'm not an Afro pessimist, and I'm optimistic because all of us have been sort of graced to be here in this moment. And I believe, like my New Age friends, however you cut it, we are undergoing a tremendous shift in consciousness, in just the evolution of humanity, and it's happening in relation to nature. So that's what makes me optimistic. I could have been born someplace else in some other time, and that gives me a lot of joy in terms of being here. So that's my optimism for today. That's my optimistic statement for today.
And I used to be such an optimist, and I thank you for that, because that's the only thing that keeps me going, holding on and seeing that, okay, yeah, this was like this for me. But baby, what my people had to put up with in the relative, I feel like I'm a princess. I live in relative comfort. And that I know that I can make my daughter's life be even more comfortable, and still maybe help save the planet, help save humanity, but do my part. Those are the only things that give me hope. Because actually, these ordinary, regular, schmegular human beings, a lot of folks are walking around with their eyes closed, with their ears closed. And that is the part that scares me. So I figure the more that I can push the narrative, especially when it comes to the commercialization of spirituality, where I can change that, because I don't do spell work for people. If you go to biglizconjure.com, yes, shameless plug, you won't see all these spell work services offered. You're going to see classes. You're going to see the materials to do the work yourself. You're going to see divinations that help you figure things out. But I'm not that person to be like, I'm going to change your life. I don't volunteer to do spell work for people, because most of the time, the people that will come to you for spell work who are unwilling to do it for themselves, they're going to sabotage it. We got a long way to go as what we call human beings. We have a lot of flaws. I know I do. And, so it keeps me balanced. I'm no longer the optimist that I was, say, in the 70s and 80s when I was a child and I was looking at things through a child's eyes, even though all kind of crazy stuff was happening then. It still seems like it was better. And I'm like, is it better now because I was unaware? Or was I aware because I knew about all this stuff? I knew about the Iran hostages. I knew about all of this stuff. But my pessimism comes from we should know better by now. How you going to look Kent State in the face when these students are protesting on campus? How are you going to look at that and do it and turn around and do the same? What? The National Guard?
Yeah.
The definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I'm just hopeful, because we've got this new concentration on mental health, that people can heal and stop doing the same things over and over again to each other. We should all be out here just eating fruit, chilling, smoking weed, making babies. That's, creating great things. Yeah. That keep the environment going rather than crushing the ozone layer. But, I just continuously seeing this disregard for the environment, this disregard for holistic living, and it's being talked about now more than ever, but people are talking and talk. And the question is, when is everybody going to start walking a walk?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that might be a good note to end things on. Let's start walking the walk.
Yes.
Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Chereau and Mambo Elizabeth Ruth. And yeah, many blessings. Thank you.
Many blessings to you too. Take care.
All right.
It's a pleasure seeing you again, Dr. Yvonne.